And your whole purpose is to have a video blog of filmmakers?
Yeah, like that's part of it. We wanted them to be longer form and less accessible, but more in depth. That's the goal. Mm-hmm. I thought a good point to start would be the fact that you said in one of your Q&As that you've had 4 retrospectives in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious, like, what that experience is like, because you watch them. You've been watching each of the films.
The films,
yeah.
But I hadn't seen some of them, and I haven't seen, like, I have several prints of different ones, so, like, I'm making notes of which prints were dirty.
Oh, yeah.
Like last night, Nitrate Kisses. I'd love you to see that pristine shape, but it needs to be replaced. And Sappho, that, I haven't seen that film in 20 years. So every curator programs differently, and I really like it that Chris programmed other filmmakers along with my work, and that happened with Stuart Comer at the Tate Modern. In fact, I think he set the standard for that, and I mentioned it to Chris, and I think he picked up on it. And that makes for a livelier discussion when 2 people are on the stage that are both makers, or like last night, bloggers about sexuality. That was really intense. Were you there last night?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
So has anyone, like, in this program there hasn't been a lot of kind of criticism, but you've mentioned in a few of the Q&As that you'd like there to be like a kind of open forum where if anyone, you know, didn't like something they could mention. Have you noticed that in past Q&As, or is that something you're always striving for?
People are shy to do that, and they don't want to rain on your parade, and you know, I've kind of like worked really hard to get where I am, so they don't want to probably critique it. But in particular, I've been asking people that I know that work on Israeli apartheid to critique the performance, because it is a work in progress. That was just the second time I've done it, and I didn't have time to really develop it anywhere from the first time I did it, when it was scheduled into a 30-minute slot. So all we did was show the Pasolini location hunting in Palestina, and then the piece that I had done previously. But people didn't know I was through. You know, I think it needs more development. And so I'm getting feedback there because I'm asking for it, and then wondering why people I know, my friends, haven't said anything. You know, that's a clear sign that they have some problems.
Yes.
And so that's what I'm asking for. Because I think it's really important for us to be transparent in our criticism. And like, an email reached me that was negative about the performance, just one word, and then the guy wrote to me and said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean that to go to you." And I said, "This is what we need, you know, my God, I'm a grown woman. I can take it, you know. It's not like I'm a fledgling filmmaker, and we should be able to critique each other's work." And I know I've critiqued his when he sent it to me. I haven't been at all praises. So yeah, that's a concern of mine. And in academia too, people play games about power positions, competition. I won't critique this because she's my boss. You know, all kinds of rules about positioning yourself in the world. And this world isn't going to get any better without our dialogue. You know, how can we expect, you know, the leader of Israel and Palestine to talk to each other if we can't?
Now, do you think that this is also part of the fact that you're being kind of historicized while still working? Like,
that's a problem, yeah.
Because, you know, in the early days, you've had difficulty finding screenings and funding, like in the festival circuits or anything like that. Then there's a kind of acceptance that happens, and then a kind of ossification, canonization, and then, but you're still creating things. So do you think that maybe people they don't want to say something about an established kind of filmmaker when...
That could be, you know, I'm so recently established that I'm not sure. I mean, I really think the Tate Modern did it, although people before that told me I was an icon.
What year was that?
Oh, it was 2 years ago.
Okay.
So MoMA was 2010, Museum of Modern Art. Tate was 2011, or 2012. And Jeu de Paume in Paris was also 2012. That was in June, and Tate was in February, and now Toronto And I have some friends that are critics that are hoping to get one in San Francisco. But, you know, I'm getting a little tired of them as well, and wanting to return just to work and make new work. But being historicized, I think, could be an issue. It could be an issue if people aren't talking to me about what they really feel. A friend, well, I don't know if she's a friend, a new acquaintance who's a young queer filmmaker, told me that she first identified that I was historicized and that was a difficult position to be in, and that I needed to take risks to fail. And she just graduated from the Chicago Art Institute maybe a year ago, and that had been the bell ringing in her ears, and I guess maybe the way they've trained the students. Fail, 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 you know, and go for it. And I'm trying to really swallow that and not do repetitive work that I know will do fine. It could go to all the festivals, it could go to Berlin. That's not what I want to do. I've already been there. I want to take that risk again.
Now, when you look at, like, say, your 70s material now, when you're retrospective like this, it seems like you are the most critical of it. And it seems like the audience members, it's maybe the flip side of when something gets historicized, but it's seen as more as a document and less as an experimental film or a piece of art.
Yeah.
And how is the reception now to those 70s films versus kind of the more hostile ones at the time, where there was the essentialist arguments, the people who just weren't familiar with avant-garde material, censorship?
So it is avant-garde.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, because first you're saying it's documentary.
No, I think that's like how maybe people that don't know how to deal with it now may think like, oh, it's just a document of a time.
Oh, I
right?
see.
Like, you know, like not necessarily a documentary, but they'll like make excuses for things that they don't like by saying it's a document, and then just focus on maybe the formal aspects of the things they do like. And that's a curious thing for me, especially placed against how it was received at the time.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm so lucky that Judith Butler has written the book she's written while I'm alive, and that I've seen young critics take up the idea of performativity. Because, you know, when you make work, I don't work out of an academic tradition, so I'm not thinking when I'm doing Super Dyke, this is a performance film, or a film called X that I just put in Canadian Filmmakers Distribution Centre, 1973, 9-minute, 16 millimeter, rarely seen, but discovered recently by my gallerist in Berlin and then sold to a Polish museum. There's a piece there that's really strong that took somebody else to see. So where was I going with that? I'm lucky that I'm alive, that performative critique has come out to embrace the work, and that there's hunger for celebration. There is hunger in the queer community for finding a joyous time, the paradise of the past, when we thought we could change the world, and we were all coming out at the same time, because now the struggle has been defined as difficult, long-lasting, and I think going back to that period of optimism and desire being satisfied right away, which I think is in my films of the 70s, is nurturing to the folks that are looking at it, the younger folks that are looking at it. The old ones are getting nostalgic, you know. And, you know, so there's a critique of nostalgia, but I don't know, it's not all bad, right? If it's memory and, you know, remembering a good time.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up performativity, because there's the Butler sense of the word that you're talking about, but you also are a director that is getting performances, and that's something that comes up a lot, that you reiterate that, you know, even in the lovemaking scenes, that these are directions, and it's not like there are strings being pulled. It's not just a realistic
No, it's not
portrayal.
a document. It's not a documentary.
Yeah, and you perform in your works as well, like you were there as a performer within them, and I'm wondering what that interpretation of the word has meant to your work, because it seems like it's a consistent element.
Right, it's consistent because I felt like I couldn't ask somebody else to get nude and make love if I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
So there was always that, and the same with Dyketactics. If you have 20 women in the country, you know, I'm there too. You know, and if there's some production shots where I'm topless and sound woman is nude, whatever, I mean, we were the crew was part of what was going on, and not a separation. Plus, there was that feeling that, you know, if I am the only one, as I felt like the only one in my film production class, as I mentioned, you know, no lesbian history that I could find behind me in terms of moving images, then I only had my own life that I could really represent. And as it turned out, luckily, the community. So that's another reason why I was putting myself in the films over and over. And then when I got cancer, nobody has, which you haven't seen that program yet because it's today.
No, I saw. Yeah.
Oh.
I saw a horse, not a metaphor.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh. I appreciate your study, I really do. So then, you know, nobody had seen what it was like to go through chemotherapy.
And my favorite moment in that film is when you say, let me know when you're going to insert, was it a needle? Because you don't want to see, but Flora, your partner, is filming. So the camera sees it. You will see it, even if you're not seeing it in that moment.
That's great. So I can get sick every time I see it.
Yeah, I was curious, like when you're editing it, like, I mean, the shot's there, like, but you can choose whether or not to put it in or not. What was the...
I put it in because there was so much affect in my face with the, you know, don't let me see it. I just used to faint with needle shots. And, you know, so I still, even if I was in for some normal tetanus shot or something, I would ask to lie back in the chair. Because I used to be afraid of needles, I guess. That's the reason.
Now, this period, like you've periodized your work in your book. There are firm lines, and people writing about you tend to do that as well. What would you call this current period with Generations and Horses Not Metaphor and Maya Dare and Sink?
Yeah, I think it's an architectural landscape geopolitical period, because you can put in Palestine there too, and my trip there, which was life-changing, and even Horses Not a Metaphor with the confines of the hospital room and the requirements to stay in the home because you're not well enough, to finally riding on the plains of Colorado, you know, and Wyoming. The way, with Maya Dare and Sink, the way architecture shapes the visual artist, the way we're here today, maybe in a better, I don't know what setting you'd planned for me, but probably what happens here is different. I feel very relaxed. I've been in this room before. It's spacious, so my thoughts feel, you know, that I can be broad. I think that those of us who work independently are both confined and stimulated by our surroundings. And so my work is continuing in that direction to look at queering a city, queering a home, but not always queering.
Yeah.
What about a woman who was in the closet, and how did she relate to her home and to details? But it is more focus on other people, even though there's some desire to show my aging body and the way that John Copeland showed his, do you know his photography?
Yep.
Like, I feel that hasn't been done, so I'm always aware what hasn't been shown and what I have to show, which is similar. But, you know, maybe I would work that way given a private studio space, a residency, you know, so part of it depends on my space.
Yeah.
And what I would do.
It seems like it's kind of a synthesis of the 80s, the kind of perceptual landscape of your 80s work, and some of the more documentary components of your 90s and early 2000s.
The essay documentary.
Yeah. How did you come to both of those periods? Because I know that in the 80s you wanted to remove the body to try to, like, get back at the people that were using that as almost a straw man to critique the 70s films, and it seems like the features maybe were better for funding or getting play in festivals. Well,
the work in the 80s was, I really wanted to present myself as a visual artist because I was known as a lesbian artist. But so the artistic part of me really, people focused on my sexual preference. So they didn't see me. So here I'd made all this work and felt unrecognized for who I am, which was, I think, maybe why artists make work. So there was also the critique of representation, and how could I put a body on the screen that wasn't going to be representative of lesbian, quote, essentialist lesbian. So that became the issue on how to frame a lesbian, or would I always be framed by what I did, and framed in the sense of go to jail, that use of the word. And that's in No No Nookie TV, where I take the body out and just use the computer-drawn body and the computer language, in probably my most successful direct attempt. Meanwhile, the landscape work was an opportunity to show my appreciation of adventure, trying to get to understand the first calendar ever made in North America, and my walk across the United States in bent time, high energy locations. I was extremely motivated in that film. The pond and waterfall, just motivated by the desire to see and beauty of underwater growth in the spring when colors are reds and yellows and oranges. And not many people really skin dive in a pond. So it's to show them, and then to follow the cycle of water down over the waterfall in the ocean, and then rain again. The clear water cycle. So there's like an ecological story in the back of my mind, even though it's silent film. And then the motivating, there's two motivators for doing the long form films. One was I was tired of going on the road and showing 6 short films, because everyone was different. I had to talk about so many different subjects, and I wanted to just develop one subject. So the second thing was independent television service was born in the United States from Congress, and that was something that I had been behind the scenes, not a significant worker, but I'd been participating and knew about it for the 10 years while image makers were getting together to tell broadcast television, we need to have a space to show work that's not usually shown on television, and of underrepresented peoples. And so I thought, oh, they finally went through, there's a lot of money there, and I could make a feature now, because surely they'll give me one for my proposal to look at lost histories of gays and lesbians and maybe undercurrents of why that happened. But I didn't get the grant. But I went ahead, because once I get started with an idea or a project, I don't want to let it go. You know, I mean, it's not about making money. In the end, even though I use that as a guide, sometimes maybe I won't make something if I don't, like that feature that was mentioned, Nothing Could Be Worse Than Two Dykes in Menopause. Yeah. So I applied for some funding for that, and I didn't get it, so I left it at the 17-minute shoot that I had done over a weekend, well, edited down to 17 minutes for a proposal. And there's enough of what the film would have been and is within that 17 minutes. So those were the two factors, and then when I went to edit this wide variety of material, which I purposely chose to be black and white, because I knew if I was editing a long film in color, there'd be so many other restrictions on color placement, but black and white's going to go together no matter what you do. And especially with archival footage and all kinds of shape that it was in. So that was a really fine decision. And then how to structure it became the question. So I've been doing research, of course, on what is history, who makes history, who's left out. So the Foucault statement, the Pat Califia, who's now Patrick Califia, were all photographed right at the beginning on 16 millimeter, because I knew if I put I would use the material if I'd put the energy into making that text as image. Otherwise, and I left it as a note in my notebook, I would probably just go for visuals and leave that out. So just knowing myself after all these years has helped. So really what happens is the text becomes the link between the different stories. And so you can see or even break it into 4 short films. If you look at it, they're segments. You know, there's the old lady section, there's the black and white male section, there's the young tattooed women section, there's the SM section, and then there's the little coda with Joan Nessel talking about the importance of saving everything for lesbian history, and you could say queer history today. So maybe I still don't know how to make a long film. No, but Resisting Paradise, that one developed in a through line, even though it circles back on itself. You know.
They all do.
They all do?
Like I feel like there's a really intense feeling that the past and the present are constantly fluctuating, and in an almost stream of consciousness way. Like it kind of replicates the mind and how the mind functions.
Oh, good.
I was thinking of like just like
good.
Virginia Woolf or like Mrs. Dalloway. Like
I mean, to have you talk to me and mention those two ideas, that person and that idea of thinking, film is thinking, make me very happy.
Yeah, it's got that modernism. It's kind of what you see with the archival footage, the lost footage, is that there's that kind of modernism, turn of the century. Film is like able to replicate these aspects of the mind and how we're influenced by things around us. The graphic matches you do between them, different moments. Even in Resisting Paradise, how even the element of criticism and theory, that's been ramped up a bit, and you don't know who you're in agreement with, who you're not.
No,
that's
you don't.
I found a really interesting component. Yeah.
Maybe I can do that in my new film. You know, not be ideologically fixed. Yeah, and leave the viewer active then in, not like, maybe the work could be broken into the 70s being active physical work for the audience, and the work from Nitrate Kisses being more intellectually active.
I'm interested how these things relate to being a lesbian filmmaker, because in the book you mentioned this process of constantly being born. Like, I think I have the quote down here, and how history is fluid in this sense, and how much of that is being influenced in these films. Or are you trying to articulate a kind of experience through the form?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I guess constantly being born in the sense that there isn't a pattern. And if there a pattern, then I would want to think that lesbian aesthetic was to break it and find something new, because it was the thrill of coming out of a heterosexual marriage of 9 years and a construction of being a heterosexual female until I was 30, and the thrill and excitement of finding something new. It happened to be lesbian sexuality, but it could be anything for other people. It could be a lot of different possibilities. And that opening so many doors of adventure in the mind and possibilities, that I guess if anything, I'd like that to happen now for old people. Because there's a resource and an image bank that are both underused or invisible. How does the aged mind think? You know, what are the values and how have they changed, and what can that do then for a queer culture? So I just signed up for a class in at Clags, City University in New York, and last night some of us were at dinner and this young dyke next to me, "You're going to school? You're going to take a class?" And, you know, I mean, academics have gone on and queer theory has really developed. And so I find myself jolted into new ideas by hearing some of these progressive approaches in education. Even when I went to Palestine, everybody was talking about the narrative. Well, that wasn't something, we didn't use that word in talking about theory back in, when did I graduate? 75 from film school. It was a long time ago. So there's a lot of discourse that, you know, I can be familiar with through reading, but then hearing it in the classroom when maybe I want to enter in the conversation, and maybe I will then be able to use the language in and let it inhabit me in a stronger way than if I did an online course or read the book by myself or the books, you know. So I guess then what I'm saying about aging is the constant learning. And the putting yourself in challenging positions. Again, you know, maybe I'll be quiet. I'll just be learning from, who knows? But just in going on this trip to Palestine as the only artist and really not involved in the Israeli-Palestine problem, and somebody who didn't know much about it. So to allow myself to be naive and new in a situation, I think that takes strength of identity, and I think that older people have that because they've lived so long and know who they are. So now for us to take the risks of redefining, re-identifying, or performing ourselves, re-performing age.
Are there aesthetics?
Fun.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. Are there aesthetics that you would associate with that, or formal tools? Because your films have always been very open to like trying new things, and one thing I really like is that maybe it's kind of an irony that Optic Nerve is maybe the most traditionally structural film, and it was so successful at the time. But I really like something like Double Strength, where it seems like it's just a bunch of tools being laid out, like just trying whatever comes to mind and seeing how it works.
What comes to mind to express feeling.
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
I'm not using any technique for its own sake.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
are there techniques that seem like they would go well with this new interest, this new curiosity?
Yeah. For instance, I'm beginning a new project on Elizabeth Bishop. And so I've been to one of her archives twice. And the thing that excited me most was, they're very careful how they handle everything. You have to be watched while you're looking at everything. You're wearing gloves, things are in plastic. And so was getting a group of folders. The first one I opened it had 2 envelopes in it. There's nothing in the envelopes. This is the most exciting moment for me so far in my research on Elizabeth Bishop. So, I had to make a sample for a grant application, and I knew it could really throw people off if I really developed that in a grant sample.
Yeah.
But I did do, maybe 15 seconds of all these envelopes torn and crumpled and opening and empty, and I plan to go further. Now I'm saving envelopes so I can do something with that, and maybe that will lead to something else, you know. That's an aesthetic, and that's a form. Maybe it'll be a form of emptiness. Maybe the archive is empty because the film, to be an essay film, has to be about an idea. Well, it could be a location, but ideas and locations. But I really want to not make a biography of her life, in any traditional way, but open some questions about closethood, and art, and things that I've faced, but in a different way, totally different way. But I wasn't born 10 years earlier, and had the life that she had as well. And I wasn't a poet, or a verbal poet, a literary poet. Keep refining. However, my archive's full of poetry.
Yeah.
No. I had a teacher once who told me that you have to decide between a filmmaker and being a poet. Yeah, thank you very much. So, when you're beginning out in life and trying different art forms, ceramics, writing, poetry, painting, never did sculpture except through projections. I love projections.
Is there any, when you were working on the book, were there aspects of your career that you felt like you deliberately didn't include, or was it just because of the space? Like, it seems like you've made a lot of films, but in your own writing and the writing other people perform on your work, there are a fair number that aren't included.
They're not included.
Yeah, and I think that maybe the one that jumps to mind is your work in Africa tends to not get written about in the same way.
Out in South Africa?
Yeah. So I'm wondering what goes into the decisions that you make to include things and not include things, and maybe how you feel like other people, why they're not doing it? Is it just like access to the materials, or?
Well, I don't think maybe I'm the best judge of my work now that X has been found by somebody else and looks like I'm proud of it. So much so that I spent a lot of money to get a really nice print and gave one here, so I hope you get to see it too. And like 73, before Super Dyke, and really personal, and relating to Carl Dreyer's Jeanne d'Arc, and with some of the imagery in it that I was still in film school. and seeing films for the first time. I didn't grow up in a film culture except for Hollywood, you know, which I rejected, except for Bambi. But what was the question?
Just the gaps that exist.
Oh, the gap with films. So some of the films, you know, I don't see them as, if they're straightforward, like out in South Africa. So it's a community-based film. It's a film that it was like a humanitarian effort to teach people who don't have access to video equipment how to do video interviews. And then in the process to learn about their lives, you know. So I went back to Africa. I got a grant to teach black lesbians in Johannesburg video. Went back, we did these great, there were 6 people in the class, great interviews, great time. I found an editor, a professional editor, who would teach them how to edit the material they shot, and I went off to a wildlife park for 2 weeks, came back, and they'd finished. And what happened was the piece looked good. I was really happy with it. I came home with a beta copy. I never got releases because I wanted it to be their film.
Yeah.
Well, it is their film, and they just, one woman in the group doesn't want her story told. The film has never been shown. But in making decisions, it's the more complex films that I like.
Okay.
And maybe that comes with age. You know, I'm glad that other people are enjoying the 70s films because maybe the Psychosynthesis trilogy, which is I Was, I Am, which is my second 60mm film, X, and Psychosynthesis, could be looked at as a whole and written about today. It hasn't been touched at all. And in fact, I Was, I Am, another 7.5 film made while I was in film school, was only shown for the first time in 40 years at the MoMA retrospective. And then, you know, so new prints were made for that and so on. You know, I think there are some other gems in there, not only that I don't see, but I think the one I talked about last night, Super Dyke meets Madam X, that's really a nice, grainy, gritty, youthful struggle of 2 women to define themselves more as artists than as lovers, I think. Even though the reason why I had a hard time showing is there's a big sex scene in it, and I'm getting penetrated, and it's a little embarrassing.
Okay.
You know, as much as I put my own body in films, that scene is a little hard for me to watch again and again. So I don't show it very often. I haven't put it out on DVD, but now's the time to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, now's the time to get out these films like Still Point.
Yeah.
That's a beauty, and it's not available except through 16mm print, the 2 or 3 that exist.
And there's a media literacy now that it would resonate with, like the multiple screens. And,
Of course, and that's why it was made, as I mentioned. This one critic, a teacher in London, found it. And so she's now been to my studio in New York, and we went back into my archive and found all the places it had been shown. Because I was thinking maybe I didn't really show it because there was a major film on before it and kind of what I think was a major film on the other side. So maybe it got lost.
Yeah.
And so it's great that she wants to do something, but to give her something to do, I had to just make a stupid little VHS that doesn't show the color or anything. So, yeah, there's, even though I'm good at distribution and exhibition, I spend time being a businesswoman as well as a filmmaker or film artist. There's a certain point where, like with the retrospectives, I'm ready to say, okay, that's enough. Like, you know, I've already promised San Francisco if they can pull it together. But that's, I think, going to be it, you know, for 5 years or 2 years or 3 years or something until I get another piece done.
Yeah. Well, looking forward to it.
Great.
Thanks, Barbara.
You're welcome. Boy, good timing. We didn't even have the 10-minute call, did we?
No, we did.
You did. Wait, how'd you get it? I didn't even see it. I saw you look over here at one point.
Yeah,
Was that it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Is it good enough?
Oh, it's good.
For what you want?
We could have done way more.
I know. Maybe it can be part 2. Come to New York and do part 2.
I'd love to do that.
Yeah. Wow, this is going to be fun to look at the other folks that you've got.
Yeah.